This lecture is on the Byzantine Empire. When you think of the Byzantine Empire, it makes sense to think a lot of the Roman Empire because there's some territorial overlap. And in fact, the Byzantines thought of themselves as Romans. Even though for most of the history of the Byzantine Empire, even though they didn't actually control the city of Rome, they still thought of themselves as Romans, and they thought of their empire as a continuation of the Roman Empire. And that's how they identified themselves. So it makes sense to think a lot about Rome. Now, the Byzantine Empire had a new capital, a new center for the empire. It was no longer Rome, even though they thought of themselves as Roman. It was the city of Constantinople, which had been founded by Constantine. And just to be clear, that's the city here. Right? That's Constantinople right there. Very important city. And that's the center of the new Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire. And one reason why the center shifted here was this territory was some of the wealthiest parts of the empire, no longer the Roman center. This is, in a sense, where the wealth, where the money is, and so that's where the political power would eventually go in this new capital of Constantinople, built by Constantine. So you have this new capital for the Roman Empire of Constantinople, named after Constantine. Now, what's kind of complex, and one reason why historians say the Byzantine Empire instead of simply saying the Roman Empire, is that if we don't recognize that distinction, we miss some very important differences between the West, the Western Roman Empire that would fall, and where they would have to struggle to rebuild civilization, and the East, where the Roman civilization, Byzantine civilization, continued to go strong. So one significant difference is the language of empire. The Romans spoke Latin. That was their administrative language. That was the daily language. That would become the language of the Catholic Church in the West. But in the East, the language was Greek, right? The language spoken in the East, in the Byzantine Empire, for government and for administration and for many church-related activities was Greek. So there's a different language there. In addition, they would develop their own understanding of Christianity called orthodoxy, right? So Orthodox Christianity. This isn't a class on religion. I'll talk a little bit more about some unique aspects of Orthodox Christianity. This is not the best way to do this, but it's the quickest way. If you want to think about what Byzantine Christianity, Orthodox Christianity is like, think of Catholicism, but more ritual and no pope. There's more to it. I'll talk more about it, but that's kind of a quick, simple way of understanding Orthodox Christianity. It's very similar to Catholicism in many important ways, but more ritualistic, no pope. And I just want to highlight, this is the symbol of the Byzantine Empire. We have to understand this was a Christian empire. And you can see that the double-headed eagle, their symbol, has a sword to defend their civilization. It has an orb with a cross on it representing the triumph of Christianity over the world. That's the symbolism. And then they've got a cross, which is, we're used to a cross with two bars, but they have the extra bar for Jesus' feet where they were nailed, and the sign, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. So one thing we also have to emphasize is that in the Byzantine Empire, there was essentially no dark ages. Whereas in the West, centered on Rome, that part of the empire fell, and there was a need to rebuild civilization. That doesn't happen in the Greek East, in the Byzantine Empire. Their civilization is going to go strong and will not be conquered, and the Byzantine Empire will not end until the year 1453. So this is a big contrast to what's going on in Western Europe. Civilizations fell, they're rebuilding. Here, civilization does not need to rebuild, it can just develop further. Now, to give you a sense of how Byzantium worked, I think it kind of makes sense to talk about a power couple, the Emperor Justinian and his wife, the Empress Theodora, and that's them pictured there on the mosaics. They're fascinating because both of them had very humble origins. Justinian started off life as a peasant, but he was a very ambitious, very talented, very shrewd individual. He caught the emperor's eye, and the Byzantine emperor had no son. So he adopted Justinian, and when that emperor died, he would become emperor himself, right? Justinian would become emperor. So it's kind of a rags to riches story. Now you may say, well, Theodora, but she was an actress. Actresses in the United States are wealthy and powerful, especially there in Hollywood, and respected. So what do you mean about, kind of rags to riches? Well, that's not how things worked at the Byzantine Empire. Actresses were kind of looked down upon. Part of this was because being an actress was actually connected to being a prostitute, and Theodora herself had actually worked as a prostitute. And it was in fact illegal for people in government service to marry an actress. That's how far down they were looked down, or that's how much they were looked down upon. But what's going to happen is Justinian, because he's close to the emperor, will convince him to change the law that forbids such marriages, and Justinian and Theodora will marry. And like I said, they're going to be kind of a power couple. And let me give you an example of what I mean here. So one thing that's kind of fascinating about Byzantium, like I said, it was a Christian empire. As a Christian empire, they couldn't have gladiatorial combat. Remember in the Roman Empire, we talked about how they would have slaves fight to the death for their entertainment. As you can guess, Christians didn't think much of that, and they ended it. So they needed a new form of entertainment, and they chose chariot racing. Right? They're going to end up focusing on chariot racing as their form of entertainment. And this was very popular. They would have a coliseum. You can see it pictured there, where tens of thousands, I think it was something like 40,000 people, but it was tens of thousands of people could sit here and watch the chariot racing. Now, here's the thing. If you get together, like tens of thousands of people, and they decide they want something, it's kind of hard to do something about it, right? It's really hard to bring in an army and stop, 40,000 people or however many tens of thousands of people who want something. Now, one thing that we need to stress in this time period too, is that these chariot races were connected to politics. You can kind of think about it this way. What's one thing that brings together people of different races, different religions, different genders, even different geographic locations, and that's sports, right? If you don't know someone, one way to kind of strike up a conversation is like, oh, did you see the big game last night, or something like that. It was the same in this time period. So you would have all these different types of people brought together to watch these chariot races. What's going to end up happening is there's a group of people who don't like Justinian, and they're going to instigate riots at one of these chariot races. They're going to actually get these tens of thousands of people to rise up in a riot to try and kick Justinian off his throne so they can have a new emperor. Right, so these politicians are going to basically get together some anti-Justinian people, are going to pay people to be to instigate a riot, and to have a riot with tens of thousands of people shouting, "Get rid of Justinian. We don't want Justinian as emperor anymore." And as you can guess, this really freaks out Justinian. He's not sure what to do about all these people rioting, saying, "We want this guy gone," and he's actually about ready to flee. And that's when Theodora, and I think this is where having a background as an actress is really good, gives this very important speech. "My lords," she's meeting with all these different men who are advising her husband, Justinian, to escape. "The present occasion is too serious to allow me to follow the convention that a woman should not speak in a man's council." So the Byzantine Empire is very patriarchal. Women weren't supposed to talk in this kind of government function. But she says, "Those whose interests are threatened by extreme danger should think only of the wisest course of action, not of conventions. So it doesn't matter whether I'm a woman or not. Judge what I'm going to say based on its merit." And she goes on to say, "In my opinion, flight is not the right course, even if it should bring us to safety. It is impossible for a person having been born in this world not to die. But for one who has reigned it, it is intolerable to be a fugitive. May I never be deprived of this purple robe, and may I never see the day when those who meet me do not call me empress." So what she's saying is, yeah, we could escape. We could escape. But you know what? Everyone's doomed to die. Everyone's going to die. And having escaped, we'll just be fugitives. Maybe it's better to stay here and take our chances and stay emperor and empress. And that's what she's saying here in this next sentence. "May I never be deprived of this purple robe." Only the royal family could wear purple. It was a special dye. It was very expensive, and only they were allowed to wear it. It was called the imperial purple. So that's why she says, "May I never be deprived of this purple robe. May I always be empress." And as a good good tool of rhetoric, she's going to repeat her message in a stronger way. "If you wish to save yourself, my lord, there is no difficulty. We are rich. Over there is the sea, and yonder are the ships. Yet reflect for a moment whether, when you've once escaped to a place of security, you would not gladly exchange such safety for death." So yeah, we can escape. We've got money. There's boats in the harbor. We can easily escape. But even if we escape and save our lives, won't we regret it? We'll be fugitives. We who once ruled We'll be dependent on others for our safety. We'll lose our freedom. People will not respect us like they did before. So she ends with this wonderful statement. As for me, I agree with the adage that the royal purple is the noblest shroud. So you may not be familiar with the term shroud. A shroud is a cloth used to wrap someone who's died. So what she means here is, I would rather die an empress, my imperial robes I'm wearing now covering me in death, than to flee and no longer be empress. Let's stay and take the chance. If we are strong, we can win this thing. And so you've got this case where all these guys are afraid. Justinian's scared, his advisors are scared, but Theodora keeps her cool, gives this amazing speech, and inspires Justinian to take action. And he calls out his army and crushes the riots and keeps his throne. So that's why I call them a power couple, right? Justinian had this moment of weakness. Theodora supports him, these wise and brave words, and they're able to pull this off. They're able to keep the empire together. And this stability allows Justinian and Theodora and the Byzantine Empire to make some pretty impressive accomplishments. One thing they do, Justinian will send out the army to go out and try and reconquer the West, to try and reunite the Roman Empire, right, to bring it back. Now, I want to stress he's successful for a time. This isn't going to last. But it does say something about his power and the dream of a unified Rome, how powerful that idea was, that he was willing to give it a shot.